Hey, good people. Welcome to the Evolving Education Project podcast, hosted by me, Dr. Tiffany M. Neachai, and friends, where we center the educational joys, passions, interests, and inquiries of people of color. This is episode 22. Coming up is a conversation with community members involved in the hunger strike movement for schooling and educational justice in the Little Village and North Lawndale neighborhoods of Chicago, Illinois. They reflect on the legacy and outcomes of the hunger strikes, how intergenerational relationships sustain social movements, and the ongoing fight for equitable education in their neighborhoods. We would like to begin by shouting out the cities and suburbs of our newest listeners. We have new listeners in Boston, Massachusetts, Swanee, Georgia, and Vancouver, British Columbia. Our audience is growing, y'all, and we know it's because of word of mouth. Thank you. We appreciate y'all for pressing play and listening in your car, at the gym, on your walk, wherever. Please continue to share this podcast with others. I also want to shout out one of our listeners with the Instagram handle Joy Team. And that is no other than Miss Stacy Joy, 40-year veteran teacher who we interviewed for episode 18. I love when guests become listeners. Thank you for liking several of our Instagram posts in a row last week. Only the real listeners know to do that. We shouted out Instagram handle Fatima B06 last week, and she reached out to us and said we could say her name. So that was no other than Dr. Fatima Brunson. Thank you, sis. This episode is part 3 of our And the Struggle Continues series, the final episode in this series. To start from the beginning of the series, go to episode 20 and listen all the way through. We don't want you to miss any part of this powerful series, which is inspired by Dr. David O. Stovall's book, Born Out of Struggle, Critical Race Theory, School Creation, and the Politics of Interruption. The context for this book is Chicago, Illinois, and the proclamation, "We were born out of struggle and the struggle continues," often chanted by Little Village and North Lawndale students in their fight for a quality education, ground this book and series. Today, we are in conversation with hunger strikers Patty Windrostro and Andrea Guzman. Patty Windrostro has worked for 30 years as a mathematics educator in Chicago, specifically as a high school math teacher, math coach, and now as an assistant professor of mathematics education, preparing future teachers at the University of Illinois at Chicago. She is a proud mom of 3 babies, ages 11, 15, and 28, and has committed herself personally and professionally to saving public neighborhood schools for working-class African American and Latina children. Andrea Guzman was the youngest hunger striker at 17 years old at the time, and her grandmother, may she rest in peace, was also a hunger striker, 75 years old at the time. A lifelong resident of La Villita and a parent of 2 boys, Andrea Guzman is passionate about intergenerational family engagement, addressing health disparities, building multidisciplinary community activations, and collaborations to better serve communities of color. She has served Black and Brown communities across Chicago for over 20 years. Her most recent effort was in support of the Quality of Life Plan for Little Village and South Lawndale. Prior to this, she worked for Chicago Commons, Chicago State University, John H. Stroger Hospital, Chicago Housing Authority, National Able Network, Inlance, and several elementary schools. Okay, let's listen in on our conversation with the hunger strikers. I'm so honored that you said that you agreed to be here today. I know you all are busy, especially people who really do organizing and activist work. And I don't know what I say this to every episode. I don't know where I fall in that, but so I'm very respectful to those, those titles. I just want to learn from you all about this experience. I have questions, but if my questions are whack and you want to this your show, okay? So you want to take it another way and you be like, change the question, throw the question away. and say we just want to get to the good work that y'all doing. So I just want to say that at first. The other thing is I just want to open us up, if you could tell us about yourself.
Okay, I'll just start. So Patty Buenrostro, and I'm 54, so I feel like I have a whole long story. But my parents immigrated from Mexico to Little Village. Little Village has been a port of entry for Mexican immigrants since probably 60s or something like that. The shift really happened in the 70s, but they came in 1958, so I guess it was the 50s. So we moved out of Little Village when I was 7, but after college, I decided to come back to the neighborhood to work as an educator. I have a degree in engineering. I hated it. I was like, this is not for me. I wanted to work with people and with young people. And that really set the course for me in education. And continue to learn a whole lot from young people about how our schools don't work, how they push them out. It's a one size fits all model that does not work for our communities. I might argue for most communities. And so I've just been an educator, high school math, because I was good at math. And I love teaching. I really, really do love teaching and working with young people, keep me young. I have 3 children of my own. I have a 28-year-old, a 15-year-old, and a 10-year-old. I know Tisoka's 28. He was like 5 during the hunger strike. Yeah, I love my children. I love my job. I feel very blessed to be able to do the work that I do. I have just moved over to UIC, University of Illinois in Chicago, so I get to be back, in Chicago, working with Chicago public school youth. There's been a long education justice movement here in the city between parents, non-for-profits, educators. Our teachers union is one of the most radical unions in the country. So again, just blessed to be able to work with amazing organizers to keep my feet on the ground, So yeah, I don't know. That's a little bit about me.
So again, thank you. My name is Andrea Guzman. Born and raised pretty much in Little Village. I was raised by my grandmother, Doña Manuelita Garcia, who was the oldest person in the hunger strike. So at the time, she was 75 and I was 17. Again, born and raised in La Villita. I'm still in La Villita now. I have 2 sons of my own. I have an 18-year-old and a 5-year-old. It was really grandma that kind of planted those seeds of caring for others and looking out for others, right? We lived right next to the viaduct off of 23rd and Avers. She and the family moved into that house in 1969. So we've been in Little Village since then, basically. And prior to that, Douglas Park and, just a bunch of other places in the city. But that was her final home. And she worked. She had 9 children and she was a worker and she worked for General Motors. Eventually she retires because my grandfather fell ill. I was born in 84, right? And in 85, my grandfather passes away. But, I really feel to this day, she's the love of my life. She will always be the love of my life. Our connection was just instant from what my uncle and my mom say, right? And eventually she raised me at about 4 or 5 years old. But I would remember going outside of the house and again, next to the viaduct, the trains would pass, right? And you would have young men. They didn't look so clean, right? They look a little roughed up. And I just remember her sometimes just giving out a blanket or making them tacos or giving them a little bit of money, like, oh, tráeme la bolsa, bring me the purse, right? And then she was a Black Club president till the very last moment, right? And everybody would come to her for resources. Blessing in disguise, I think her having been retired really allowed her the opportunity to be able to do a few more things in the community, get more involved in the community. And then eventually, when my grandmother was in her last moments, I remember Sonia Silva, who was a state representative here in Chicago and Illinois. She calls me during that time because I called the community like, hey, if you want to send your last love notes to grandma. So she called and she was like, so she starts the call with like, so I met your grandma in 1980 something. I can't remember the year. And I was like, okay. She was like, she told me that all her kids were grown, but she wanted to do something for her grandkids. And so my grandmother ended up starting to get a little bit involved, like school councils and just community meetings here and there. And so while she was raising me, she was heavily involved at the grammar school that I went to. And then in the high school, she becomes everybody's grandma. And so again, I'm a teenager, right? She's starting to go to these community meetings. And then I remember Mother's Day of 2001, right? She comes in and she was like, "Hey, we got to go to press conference." I'm like, "All right." Like, again, I'm a teenager. I'm like, whatever, sure. Okay, grandma. So we go, and then it's just a small group, and then the press conference is there, and there's a bunch of noise. And then that's, we'll get into that story later, but she's been the one to plant those seeds in me. So I owe her everything. I'll leave it there for now.
Yeah. I used to always say that Doña Manuelita is like the mayor of Little Village. Because she was always, her, que descanse en paz, rest in peace. She passed a few years ago. But she was always like, oh, there's an obstacle, there's a hurdle. Well, let's figure out how to get over it. And it was always just with grace and calmness. It was never like this, like, I'm gonna come out and get you, right? It was always with like the sweetness of like, I need some answers and we need to figure this out. She was, so I always referred to her as the mayor of Little Village.
Love that. I love hearing the story of this is so special to me because you do these invitations and you want to have these conversations and then just something so much more happens, and I feel like we haven't started but it's already happening for me, because how beautiful is it to have the perspective of a parent and a teacher, as long as someone who was a young person at that time who is now bringing their grandmother into this space apart. I mean, it's just so beautiful to me and important. And so this intergenerational space that also includes our ancestors, right? And your children that you have now, and how all of this is connected into the work that you do. And so as I'm understanding this, I just want to get a general time span in my head because, I think the one that this is based on Dr. Stovall's book, right? And so that's around 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, right? I would say like where that one is. But this has been going on way longer than that one that's highlighted in the book, right? So what is it? And then I saw something. I was doing I taught this a couple of years ago. I taught this doc class on ethnic studies and the learning sciences, and we read Stovall's book, and then we were looking back into La Velita and all of these, like and I saw some stuff like in the 70s, okay, I'm not going to say it wrong, but it's like the organization, the grassroots organization, Pilsen.
Was it like the grassroots?
I think so.
I don't know. Kathy, you might.
But to your point, Tiffany, yeah, in the 70s, right? Like the Chicago has a history. And Dr. Elizabeth Todd Breland, or Breland Todd, I forget which way it goes, but she wrote a book, and I'll have to give you the title of the book, that kind of really lays out the history of Chicago reform in Chicago, starting back from the 70s, right? Where it's like, actually, I think she goes back at least as far back as 1963, when, we're trying to integrate the schools in the North, right, in Chicago. And they have these, white folks were not trying to have black kids go to school with their kids. So they created these Willis wagons, right? Like they're going to put these mobile units, they're going to integrate by putting by putting black kids into these mobile units. And that, the community rose up against that, right? So like we're talking the 60s, right? In the 70s. So when I decided to come back to Little Village and teach, I was at Latino Youth. Latino Youth was one of several alternative high schools that started in the 70s, because they realized, right, like our schools are not doing it. They're not teaching our kids, right? Our kids are being pushed out. They're not learning not learning about their history, about their culture, and so they're not building on ancestral wisdom, right? So these schools were created, right, as an alternative, hence the name alternative schools, right? So yeah, so the history in La Villita goes, way back, right? It does really go way back from when, community, parents, right? Parents and community members saying this is not, we didn't cross the desert, there was no wall at the time, right? We didn't do all this to come have a subpar education, So yeah, it goes way back. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I appreciate that. And I love this, like where you all are and where you were before, because it's showing the rich history. Because I think I'm only a year older than you. So I'm like, when she was 17, that's when I was like, I was like, I was in school. She was out here organizing, like, okay, doing a hunger like, it's just like,
I didn't know it though.
Yeah.
I didn't know. I was just like, oh, it sounds good. Okay.
But that's why our elders are important, right? And to bring us along and to make sure we're doing that work. So just to get some background, which I appreciate the history, so we have more of a time span of like all of this work. Can you describe La Velita or Little Village and the North Lawndale areas in Chicago and the communities there? And then it'll probably come up anyway. But like in your perspectives as folks who lived in those communities, or at least Little Village, what are the tensions between those communities?
I can share. I mean, there's a reason why I have a teenager. So, and it really has been thanks to him and through his experiences and through his lens and his voice that I've unfortunately felt. In my world, we can love each other, we can build, we can bridge, we can break bread, we can organize, we can marry, we can do all sorts of beautiful things, right? There's no issue. It's just us having a conversation, right? Getting to know each other, literally, like in relationships, like in dating, right? It's just taking the time to get to know someone. But I feel through my experience of just kind of observing my son and listening to him, the tensions between Black and Brown communities is still there, particularly our young people. And again, I'm biased because I have an 18-year-old, but there's still tensions there. They still look at each other a little funny. We can be friends, but it doesn't mean that we're friends with all of them, right? Like with all of the community. And then in Little Village, unfortunately, we still have the dynamics of street organizations or gangs. And that tension is still very heavy, unfortunately. I used to live on the west side of Little Village, and now I live on the east side, right? I live down right off of Cermak and Drake now. So it's very different, right? Like I tell people, unfortunately, I used to hear gunshots maybe 3 blocks away from my house, living on the west side. And now I hear it like around the corner. And I'm right across from the viaduct again, right? I'm right along the train tracks, the same train tracks. And you feel that, and again, for me, it's not an issue, but for my son, it is. He has to be careful where he goes, who he talks to, unfortunately. So those are the tensions. It's more, I think, more on the more of our youth are having some of those tensions. And then by default, we still live in the country that we live in, and we still have people running for office, for leadership roles. I really I don't even know how that happens, right? That are still spitting out ignorance and division. And so it just comes from the top down, I feel. I know people, unfortunately, still are worried about walking into Little Village or, it is what it is. When my son, my oldest, he ended up going to Little Village Lawndale High School. He actually went to Sojo Bati for a couple of years, which is pretty awesome. So cool. He was like, I saw grandma's mural every morning, right? Because her face is right outside the exit. But unfortunately, the school system itself doesn't work for him. And actually, Bati, Latino youth is where he's at, right? So it's kind of interesting. We'll have to catch up. But even there at school, right, there were still tensions in the school between Black and Brown students. Even though they're already in the same building, there's no having to cross streets anymore. Like we're all here now. There's still tensions there because of what happens outside. And that's really unfortunate. I mean, we're supposed to be working together, finding ways to build with each other, because that's why they fear us so much, right? Especially when we start hanging out and becoming friends. Like, You don't want that. But anyway, that's just my experience so far. Living in Little Village, literally right on the border of North Lawndale, Little Village. It's unfortunate.
And how would you say that the history of, like, even when I think of Angela Valenzuela's work about how in Houston, Mexican American students were racialized as white and then integrated with Black students so that they could get away with not having white students go to school with brown students, so that they could get away with not really doing integration. Would you say that the history and the problematic history of integration with Black and brown youth contributes to those tensions?
Sorry, I would say, yeah. I don't know, but if you want to add, I don't want to take over that answer, but yeah, I mean, even today, I always have a little mini fit at the clinic, for example, because they still ask you what's your ethnicity or whatever, and they typically have selected white for me. I'm like, girl, do I look like that? No, none of this, none of this. Like, look it, right? And so I'm like, no, you got to check off Native American or something else, but not that, because you have to represent us properly. And I think that's where we have to consider literally those little, just very quick, and they don't even ask you anymore. They just like, they just move you forward. Every time I would, like, during COVID and all these funding opportunities for undocumented, non-undocumented, whatever, we would have to ask for race, and I would have a long conversation. I'm like, look, right, we would have a conversation about this question right here, because I wanted to make sure that whoever was giving us the funding knew exactly where it was going to. It is not going to a white community. It is going to everybody else. So anyway, I'm gonna get off because this is a big rant for me.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understood the question, Tiff.
Yeah, I just think I'm trying to historicize it instead of, that's always important to me when we talk about tensions between communities of color. Like, it's not just something that we necessarily, I believe it's orchestrated. I don't believe, and I think what we see is the effects of it. And then what you have is youth not getting along in communities and everybody fighting for this small piece of the pie. Like, it's one very small for all of us to split. And then you get everybody like concerned about their own community, as you should be. I'm not saying you should be concerned about your own community, but not seeing the parallels across. And I believe it's orchestrated. And so I just like to historicize that, and not that we just don't like each other, or like these Black and brown youth just don't like each other. Right. So that's what I was trying to get at.
And that did come up in the high school, right? Because the hunger strike was in Little Village, right? It's located physically in Little Village. And so when Chicago Public Schools, to address this federal mandate to integrate, right? And we just don't have, you have to integrate communities if you want to integrate schools, right?
Yes.
And our communities are segregated, right? So people inevitably, to integrate, you have to cross boundaries, right? And, I'm not going to be the first person to say, right, that there's a lot of anti-Black racism in the Latino community. And we have a responsibility to stand up against it and historicize it and let folks know, like, it actually said no Mexicans, no dogs, no Negroes, like we were, and so, and if you were whiter, you could pass for white, and having to choose in these categories, white, Black, when we're a multiracial community, right? We are in a mix of indigenous, European, African, descendants, right? So people not knowing their history, right? So it's our responsibility to educate our own folks and stand up when, people are just being ignorant, quite honestly. Ignorant in the sense of, like, they just don't know the history, right? Or thinking that there's a hierarchy of, access, and we want to make sure we're closer to access, means that then we have to put people behind us or below us, right? So that's, I'm sure Andrea's been doing this work. I know I've been doing that work, in my own family, right? Like, schooling people about, like, wait a minute, what you're saying and what you're thinking is actually wrong, So yeah, so there's like the, CPS coming in and saying, this is what you all have to do. And then us having to, which is, and the young folks in Little Village, Lawndale knew that North Lawndale, Little Village is formerly known as South Lawndale, right? So you got South Lawndale, you got North Lawndale. And so letting, like, and the young people, educating the young people to know that we are one zip code, actually. We are one zip code, right? But the forces have us divided along this viaduct, right? And we have to fight those forces, right? So it's continual, And I would say since I started in 93 in Little Village, there have been, even before I started, right? Harold Washington was our first Black mayor, right? And he won because there was a Black, white, Latino alliance. he would not have won if that alliance did not exist, right?
Mhm.
So there's a history in North and South Lawndale, and we just have to continue to work in that same vein, right?
Yeah. And I appreciate the history and the whiteness that I think all communities of color, the desire to want to be in proximity to whiteness fall,
Yes.
you fall for that. And
Mm-hmm.
you have to remember that like it doesn't matter, like, right? Thank you for that. I was just trying to make sure I understood that as
Mm-hmm.
shape the questions. I wasn't trying to get into the black and brown tensions. But I also wanted to make sure I want to make sure I understand and that our listeners understand the place,
That's right.
and all of that. So my next question is, what conditions, practices, and events led to the hunger strike? The one that, well, anyone, since it seemed there was more than one. How many hunger strikes? Y'all got to school me. Y'all got to school me because I'm just like, I just read this and then you talking about when you were 17. So that was like, what would that, when we was, I would have been 8. So that had to be 2000, right?
2001.
2001, yeah, because I graduated from high school in 2001. So I'm just like, so y'all got to school, whatever hunger strike y'all want to talk about, just tell me about the different hunger, like the ones that y'all was a part of. Because I'm just like, it sounded like it was a lot of hunger strikes.
There was one in 2015 for diet to save the only open enrollment public high school in Bronzeville, historically Black neighborhood. So they were going to close their only open enrollment high school. There's a lot of crimes being done here and that have been done here in Chicago. But I'll just say that in short, what happened with our hunger strike is that it was kind of a culmination of a lot of organizing that was happening. The mayor had promised 3 new high schools, and 2 are now the top 2 high schools in not only the city but in the top 2 public high schools in the city and in the state of Illinois. So they were really built for gentrifiers, right? They were really built for, to attract, upper middle class, primarily white families,
Mm-hmm.
but not just white families, wealthy families. And the third one was Little Village. And they built the other 2. And it turns out, so Andrea was mentioning Sonia Silva, who I called her. She sat on the Education Appropriations Committee at the state level and made sure that we got that money, $30 million for Little Village. And the district took our money and spent it on other things. They eventually they had to admit that that's what they did, because we're like, okay, we see the line item that you all got $30 million and it says Little Village High School, and yet we've got an empty lot. So, we called them out. We went to the board meetings. I joined halfway through that year of organizing, I would say. And what happened with the hunger strike, it was literally 4 days before Mother's Day in 2001. And we're sitting in Chuy Garcia's office. It was a small, he probably had a staff at the time of, I don't know, 5 people or something, and he's like, what about a hunger strike? Like we gotta get this out on the media, in the news. And we were all like, well, let's go back and talk to our families. It's not something you take lightly. It's not something you just like sign on to. Right. And so we came back, and I remember there being 4 of us, Doña Manuelita, myself, Linda Zarate, and I can't remember who the 4, I think maybe it was Toribio. Esteban might have been the 4th person. But it was 4 of us that said, okay, we'll do this, right? So we went to the press conference. So we decided on Saturday that 4 of us would do it. On Sunday, right, Doña Manuelita brings Andrea along, Sammy joins, the other youth, this other woman gets, who was part of the organizing. She was interviewed on the local news, and she said, we're going on a hunger strike. And when they took the cameras off, she looked at her sister and said, did I just say we? Did I just say we? So she was like, I guess I got to do it, because I'm not going to be, I'm not a liar, We started off with 4. By the end of the night, we had grown from 4 to 14.
Mm.
You know, and so, you know, that's kind of how it started.
Whew. Okay. So I got a 2-part question, but it's because of your work. Because I got to quote you from the foreword of Dave's book. So in your foreword, Patty, you to Stovall's book, you state, it was quite fascinating how quickly a group of people can muster up a collective sense of agency when your next meal is on the line. And I just felt like that was so powerful. So I want you both can talk about this because you were there too, right? And I'm, you know, to talk about that quote. But as you talk about it, I also want to know, like, how would you describe a hunger striker? Like, what makes one a hunger striker with that quote?
I don't know what makes one a hunger striker. You know,
Mm,
I don't know if I can answer that. I don't know how to answer that question. But, you know, I thought it was going to be 3 days. I was like, you know, I could, most people think they can go 3 days without eating, right? Like, it's not going to be fun. You know, you're going to be hungry. You're going to get the headaches, but you know, 3 days feels manageable, right? I was walking out of I was leaving for the press conference, and my brother-in-law was grilling. So I popped Italian sausage in my mouth. That was literally the last thing I ate before I struck. I was like, okay, let me eat something very delicious, right?
wow.
We'll go on 3 days, maybe 5 days, you know, but because and so this is how we became hunger strikers, right? Because
Mm,
we were not eating. And so, you know, that's a whole new meaning to the word hangry, you know. There's a whole new meaning to that word, where
yes.
we're like, are you not eating? Because I'm not eating. So you're not
Right.
going to tell me what to do. I mean, we never, you know, like we kind of had that attitude, right? Where it was like, we are going to make decisions about what we do and how we do it and when we do it and
Mm.
who we do it with, right? So that's, you know, that's how we became hunger strikers, right, Andrea? You want to add something?
Yeah, I don't think there's a right answer except the fact that you have to have a lot of love. I was just reading, I don't know, some meme, social media, and the person says, well, I'm a lover. And they're like, well, in order to be a lover, you have to be a fighter. So you have to have a lot of love. And I feel that that's what we had. You know, for me, Sammy really was my influence because here's this other young person that's like, oh, yeah, I'm going to do it. I see just casual, right? Like, yeah, I'm going to do it. I was like, okay, sure, right? And then, you know, Grandma and I go back home that evening after the press conference, and I'm like, Grandma, I'm going to do it. She's like, no, 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 no. We're just going to be there to support, and we're going to, right? We're just there to support. And I'm like, no, like, we're going to do it, or I'm going to do it. And then, well, then we did it, right? Like, that was the official, that was it. That was the extent of our conversation. And so the next day we did it. And I actually still remember the meal that we had that day after Mother's Day. So good. But I guess I remember it because it was my last meal for a while. Didn't know. But I think it's just having a lot of love and consideration for those that might not have. In my case, I was at a high school. I had no issues getting there. I wasn't worried about what colors am I wearing. I'm not worried about somebody hurting me because of my affiliations to any, like I wasn't worried about any of that. And that was a big influence for me, considering that a lot of you didn't have that opportunity. And at the time, the only high school in this beautiful, gorgeous, overly populated community was Farragut, and that was founded on the east side of the neighborhood. Well, the west side kids can't necessarily come on the east side safely, or they don't feel safe, or their parents don't feel safe to cross, right? And so, but we had so many schools that were graduating so many children. Well, where do they go? Well, they didn't have options. So they either drop out, they find jobs, or they have to go hours and hours away. Actually, one of our youth had to travel at least an hour and a half to 2 hours every morning to get to school, right? And it's like, well, you could have been there in like 10 minutes if there was one round down the street. So again, I didn't have those issues. And so part of my consideration for that I didn't have to face that is like, well, we need one here because they should have one here, right? So that, and then eventually just the lack of options at the time. When I remember coming back to one of the meetings that you all had, Patina, I don't know if you were at that meeting in particular, when Paul Vallis and I forget one of the other board members came to have a conversation with you all. And one of them, I don't think it was Paul Vallis, although I'm not a fan of him at all. But the other guy, very racist comment. I'm like, well, why do you want a higher education if y'all just reproduce like rabbits anyway? Right. And I'm never going to forget when they were telling me the story about our communities. So it's just like attack after attack after attack, right? Telling the community that they can't amount to much more. So why give you an opportunity anyway? It's like, nah, dude, like you're not even supposed to give me anything. It should have been here already. Period. Right. And now during COVID, if we pay attention to the numbers, like Little Village, like all of these communities and surrounding communities were essential workers. Chicago would have been done. Give it 24 hours with all of our essential work. Like, dude, come on, man. Really? Anyway, see, I'm like my goosebumps. I'm boiling already with this guy. I'm boiling.
As you should be.
So that's what a hunger striker is. It's somebody that can get angry enough to really use that to fight for someone and something bigger than themselves. Because this wasn't about me. I was already in high school. I was going into my junior year. I didn't have to find any other place. I was okay. But everybody else wasn't.
I love what Pati said. I'm not eating. Are you not eating? You don't get to tell me. You don't get to tell me what to do. Like, we are going to muster. And I'm asking you so many things about it because I feel, and correct me in just you hear about protests, but you don't hear a lot in today's day and time about hunger strikes, especially in a US context. So it's very, and I think it's important for young people and other organizers and activists to learn about different ways to protest, different ways to organize today. Not something that's from the past. So that's why it's so like, I'm like, like I have my image of Gandhi. I'm just being real. You know what I mean? Like that's my, that's my understanding. And so what outcomes from the hunger strike are you most proud of, if any?
Well, like Andrea, my son went to social justice high school. So Little Village Lawndale High School is 4 small schools on one campus. They share a cafeteria, they share 2 gyms, they share an Olympic-sized pool, right? I'm just proud that our kids get to go to a fully functional high school on one level. But we always said, right, like it's not so much you can have a nice building, but at the end of the day, it's about the relationships and the people that occupy that building, right? So I think that I'm most proud of the founding teachers that have stayed at that school now it opened in 2005. They're going on 20 years, right?
Wow.
I am most proud of the community that we built in the process between educators, parents, youth who are now parents, right? Who have carried that legacy. That's what I'm most proud of. In 2012, they had fired our principal. And I'm also proud that the mayor at the time was afraid to step into our community. That's another thing I'm proud of. He was scared of us.
Right. Sometimes that danger is it works to our benefit. Like don't step over here, right?
For real.
It's a protection sometimes.
So, I'm proud of that legacy. So in 2012, they fired our principal. Just, we're at Will State. You have to give a reason. The network chief came, just fired her, and brought in a new, inexperienced principal. First thing she did, we still don't understand to this day why she came in and she removed AP classes. Okay. Overnight, the young people organized a sit-in. Overnight, the seniors organized a sit-in, and they said, parents, we need you to come and have our back, right? You remember that community meeting, Andrea? It was packed. And it was
beautiful.
Packed not only from people in the school, but people in the community, from the other alternatives, from Rudy Lozano. I mean, it was like, so that to me, that's what I'm proud of. If there's an issue, we got people to call on. That's what I'm very proud of.
Agreed. Yeah, that was a beautiful moment. And I think that's a testament to a lot of the work prior to, right? Thanks to the founding teachers that have that spirit and they get it, right? They get it. And I feel the result is then that the youth got it, right? The las semillitas were planted, the seeds were planted, and they took to organizing and they took the voice and they took to marching and they took to organizing with their parents and the adults around, and they got a veteran hall here in the neighborhood to host a meeting, right? Like, that's, hey, right? Like, yes, that's exactly what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to help support the creation of productive, loving, committed citizens in their community that actually fight back, that understand that when a boundary has been crossed, when you have offended my community and you've hurt me, like, okay, let me call a few people, I'll get right back to you, right? Like, that's exactly what you're supposed to do. You're not supposed to let anything or anyone step over you, especially when it's not just impacting you, but it's impacting so many other people. And then the way that they did it was very conniving. They did it right, like right before school, right? Like in that really small window of summertime is coming, ain't nobody gonna know, you know. And then when school starts, whatever, she left, we fired her, whatever, right? No le van a poner atención. They're not gonna pay attention to that. But that was beautiful. I remember that. It was awesome. Yep. And I remember how the community came back, and then I remember a couple of elders took the new principal to the side, like, hey girl, just letting you know that if shit hits the fan, they're throwing you under the bus. You're the new kid on the block. Don't think this is going to go in your favor. You might have a pretty position. It doesn't mean you're going to be okay.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that happened.
The other thing, y'all are so great. I was going to ask you this question. You kind of both of you hinted in this, and this could be I'll do this as my last because I want to respect your time. I had a question about, maybe it's because I grew up in Buffalo, New York, and I just don't really see my communities organizing in a way that that this example is like parents and like coming together, like organizing and demanding of schools. And I just think that's beautiful. I think that's an example. I don't know, maybe it's because where I grew up, I just don't see that where in my context where I grew up, not where I live now, but where I grew up. And so that part is interesting to me. So I appreciate you all speaking to that a little bit about like the parents. How do you cultivate that in people and like teachers and parents in the community? Like they know what time it is, like, and we can come together. Like, I don't see that. And so you could say something about that, but I just wanted to speak to that. And my last and final question would be like, what would you like to see moving forward for the schools in that area? You could take any one of these. How do we sustain these social, in essence, like how do we sustain these social movements? And that's it.
That's a lot.
I know. I'm just trying to, y'all, I just got y'all and y'all got me going. I'm just like, whatever y'all want to say.
I will share here. I'm just going to throw this in. One of the teachers from Sojo, he grew up, he remembers, he's like, I wanted to go to the high school so bad, but he remembers his parents taking him to whenever we had demonstrations there, teach-ins, and we were there 24/7 for 19 days. And so everybody would come around. Anyway, we could talk more at another time. But anyway, so one of the teachers just text messaged me a few days ago that it looks like CPS is actually looking into merging, meaning closing. So as Pati noted, the building is divided into 4 different schools with different focuses, so to speak. And they've tried this before. They've tried closing and then just creating one big school. And so it looks like there might be a fight pretty soon again to kind of fight that back. Because, instead of the board looking for funding to support the school to function in a stronger way, they're looking to like, nah, we're just going to close it and we're just going to merge everybody. So forget what you're asking for. Anyway, the fight, the struggle literally continues, right? And that's one of our slogans, that the struggle continues. Born out of struggle, the struggle continues. That's a slogan at Sojo, but it's always going to continue to be under attack. And this is why it doesn't just begin or end with a hunger striker. It started with community folk coming together. It started with Odon Tomas, one of our elders, who is still beautiful, vibing and dancing and doing beautiful things, right? With his organizing background and roots from Chile, right? He comes here and he help coordinate, right? People such as Patti, my grandma, Carolina Perez, and his kids, right? Because his kids were also hunger strikers with us. Like, it's a collective effort to make that very conscious decision about we're going to refuse food for a while. We don't know how long it's going to be, but this is because we want this so much more, because the community was asking for another school. They weren't asking for a plaza. They weren't asking for frivolous things like one of our other elders had said in the video. Like, we were asking for education for our youth, for our children. And so that's that, you tug at the heart of a parent, mama bears, papa bears, right? Like, you tug at that, of course you're going to get people to come out and fight back a little bit to a lot of it. So it's really thanks to that intergenerational, and I'm a huge fan of intergenerational relationship. Of course, grandma raised me, but I'm a huge fan of that. I think today our elders are not necessarily where they should be, which is with us at the table, sharing their wisdom, whether it's life, whether it's organization, organizing the community, whether it's professional, whatever it is, but we need that wisdom. And I think some of those avenues are dwindling quite a bit. I'm very blessed that I had my grandmother to guide me through a lot of things. And I'm blessed to have had people such as Patti and Dr. Stovall, right? Like, be in my life. Like, here I am, a teenager, and I see them like my sheroes and heroes, right? Like, damn, like, I got to work with them, dude. Like, you have no idea who they are. So if they ever call me to do something, yep, I'm coming. You don't have to add, I don't need details, just what time and where, I'll be there, right? If they call me, I'm there. Because that's the love and the respect that I have for them. And I think that is also part of why the students responded in the way that they have for multiple events, right? That wasn't their only sit, and they've sat in for other stuff. They've created walkout opportunities for other things. Even with Black Lives Matter, right, during COVID season, right, my son and a bunch of youth from the school, they led a march from Little Village High School to the firehouse in North Lawndale, right? Like that. So it is very possible, regardless of the tensions and then the way that people keep feeding those tensions. Like, it is very possible to have a unity amongst our youth, amongst all of us. It's just a matter of taking the time to get to know each other and to share with one another. And for me, being a 16, 17-year-old at the time, like, girl, I was sheltered. My grandmother was Catholic, and I didn't do a whole lot of stuff. So I got to sleep there. I was like, what? I get to camp out, like, out in the city, right, on 31st and Costa, right? But thanks to that opportunity, I was able to meet and organize and learn from all of these different organizations that came to support, to give us the love, to pour in, to back us up. Because they were literally neighbors down the street that unfortunately eventually ended up burning up a stage that a carpenters union built for us, right? They built it for us so that we can have a stage, so that we can have poetry nights, and we can just have a space where we could take the mic, talk to our community, talk to our youth, talk to our elders, have our elders talk to us, right? Like, just that exchange when you have a mic and a stage, right? Just everything that could happen there. And they burnt it this was towards the end of it all, because we were all so tired. We went home. We finally went to bed, to our beds, instead of sleeping on chairs or sleeping on the ground in sleeping bags. Like, we went home that one night. And that one night is the night that they burned our stuff down. The cops actually didn't even mess with us, right? They would just kind of like make their rounds and stuff. Like, we really didn't have a lot of issues on that corner, on that site. But it was neighbors that were hating, that were on the other side of the fence, so to speak, that didn't necessarily want us to triumph, which is stupid. Like, why wouldn't you want this for the youth that are literally walking down your sidewalk every morning now to and from school? And I also share, like, it's always beautiful to find young people today. Actually, one of my coworkers, and I haven't had a conversation with her about my relationship to her. She graduated from Little Village Londo High School, and now she's a beautiful, strong, independent mother and advocate, and just amazing woman, amazing being. There's a lot of them like that. There's a lot of our youth. And what I also love about the first graduating classes that I've gotten to meet today, because they are the adults, they are the parents, right? Like, they're running lives, is that they're going back to the school. They're finding ways to give back, to reach back, right? Like, we're connected to another young woman who is a professor, and she's teaching, I don't know what she was teaching, but this was the one that Tiffany brought up about a week ago. right? She's a professor and she wants us to be a part of that. But dude, she's a professor, right? Like she's got people's attention. You're spreading the seeds, right? This is all about planting seeds and cultivating. And so, yeah, I might be 40, but man, I am still learning. I am so grateful for this road and this opportunity. And I'm getting emotional because my grandmother planted those seeds and this community has planted those seeds. And we have to continue to plant those seeds because whenever I hear, like my son just told me this morning, there was a shooting right here on 26th Street. 7 people got wounded or shot or killed. I don't know. I don't like listening to the Citizens app. I'm like, I don't want to have the view that that is my community. I want to remember that my community is hard working. They're here for so many reasons, and one of those is to give more to their families. And I have many friends that are undocumented that have lost their parents. They haven't seen them in over 20 years. We have a lot of that here. You haven't hugged your mom in how many years? 20 plus years. Damn. I can't imagine not being able to hug my kids for one day. Right? So that those are all the culminating struggles that make, I'm going to go back to your question, that's what makes a hunger striker. That's what makes somebody that fights back. Or somebody that loves so hard that they don't want anybody else to suffer in that way. If they could just a little something, if they could just leave a little something so that it's a little bit better for the next generation, that's what we're going to do. And that's what we're going to be. So thank you too, Dr. Nachai, for doing what you're doing, honey, for affording this, not for affording this, but for providing this space, but really for doing what you're doing in your classes with your students. You have no idea how far those seeds are going to go. Because Pati didn't know and I didn't know how far my seeds are going to go. Neither did my grandma. Ain't nobody know. Just like all educators, they don't know how far their seeds go. Oh, yeah. I'm going to stop there. I took over the mic and I don't want to apologize, but I apologize because I want Pati to take over. I want you all to take over. But thank you for this.
Thank you.
I mean, Doña Manuelita lives in you, right? Like when you have an elder pass, you know, your love and your relationship with them changes, right? And they are now in you. They are a part of you, right? And that is a beautiful thing, right? That I know I embraced because I lost my mother last December, right? And always grateful and honor her by living out her values and her principles in me, right? And that's a beautiful thing. I will say, because you were talking about, Tiffany, about like you don't really see that in Buffalo, right? And I'll say about the context here in Chicago, and part of it is they're never gonna collapse those schools because we will never allow it to happen, right? I really do trust and believe that to be the truth. But you were talking about other hunger strikes. So just very briefly, right? Like, so that was 2001. And so they were trying to close this school in Bronzeville, the only open enrollment public school, a public high school. Bronzeville has a rich history, jazz musicians, from the, I'm really bad with, time periods here, but back in the day, right? And so, they consulted with us, right? And so like we, kind of supported them and their struggle, right? And out of the diet hunger strike, now they went 34 days. Okay. We did 19, they did 34 days, right? And out of that hunger strike, the principles that came out of, our legacy and their legacy, we now have 20 sustainable community schools. We have forced the district to give these 20, the 20 of the more under-resourced schools across neighborhoods, right, in Chicago, an additional $500,000.
Mm.
Yes. So our fight is not just for Little Village, right? Our fight is for all of these neighborhood high schools where, you know what? Who can afford to drive their kid across town and get into a selective enrollment high school, right? Because we know, right? We know that the biggest predictor of how you do on a test is your family income. Right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the best predictor of how you're going to do on that test is how much money you have, right? So we are, as a sustainable, so I'm a task force member for sustainable community schools. We have to, it's not just about Little Village, it's about all these neighborhoods that The city, Pilsen, they've been trying to gentrify. They've gentrified half of it, right? But people are holding on strong, right? North Lawndale, they've been trying to gentrify North Lawndale forever because it is in a location that they want, right? So we have to show up for these communities, right? And so, I think that, remember, we started off with 4, and by the end of the night we were 14. And that's one of my biggest lessons, is that you don't need a lot of people, right? You just need a few people to take that risk, to be courageous, and the community will support you, because we wouldn't. That's how, that was our bread and butter, was the community, right? That one day, Andrea, where we were just like, I don't know, it was like day 4, 13, 14, and we were just spent. It was a Sunday, and we were just looking at each other like, what the hell are we doing? And then all of a sudden we look down the street, and there's like 30, mostly women, right? With these, they had made these signs coming, they were from a local church, and they were marching down the street and came up to support us, and they lifted our spirits, right? And so our communities are hurting. There's no question about it, but sometimes, don't underestimate what a few people can do. Really. And then, like, there's beauty in struggle, and those seeds, that legacy, people, we just don't know who it's going to impact, and now with social, I don't know. I'm not going to say anything about social media, but, but we have access to more information, right? We have access to more information, more things happening, right? And to Andrea's point, like, I also don't want, if you look up Little Village on Google, I'm sure the first thing you'll see is shootings, right? But we have to continue to tell these stories and fight that negative perception of ourselves, because I'm sure in Buffalo there are also beautiful stories, right? But they don't make the front page. They don't make the front page. And so we have to use, we can use social media to our advantage to, showcase those people that are doing those small things behind the limelight, right? That do make a difference, right? So we're continuing in Chicago, because we got, they continue to try to gentrify these neighborhoods, and they have, right? A lot of them on the north side, right? But we got to continue to think about those folks that, their kids don't have a choice but to walk to the nearest high school, and make sure that those schools are thriving, right? They're places where our kids can thrive. So.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Thank y'all. Oh my. Ooh. This is going to be one of the episodes I'm be sitting in my car like, I already know. It be some episodes that I'm going to be listening to it a few times. I just know, because I don't want to miss anything. Thank you so much. Thank you for just the wisdom, the histories, the perspective, the love. You ooze of, Andrea, you just ooze of the love of your people, of your community, and humanity. And that's what I hear from you all. Like, you're fighting for many children who don't have some, the opportunity. And I feel like you fighting for little Tiffany when I was a kid. A lot of us do this type of work and that's why I always push about social classes, because I grew up working class, and I feel like it is different. I feel it. It's still on me. It's still on me as a professor. And, that class is on you, and even when you make up more money, but it's still on you. And I feel the slight, and I feel the difference, and I feel who gets to do this. Even people ask you whether you rent or own your house. Why do you need to know that? Like, people are always trying to place you and put you in this, or what neighborhoods you live in, and da 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 da. And it's just, and what youth are able to do. And I appreciate the intersection of class intentional, class, ethnicity, and race, and language, and all of that, because we can't, you see things happening for us. But even I'm pushing against even a lot of our working critical scholars is like, But who was in your study? Was it the suburban Black kids, or was it open to, you know what I mean? Like, was it your friends, the professor's kids? Like, we got to talk about that. Like, and if, just say it. I'm not saying that those kids don't need certain things, but I'm just like, be real about that. So the research the stuff we doing is different from, because I get whoever is willing and able, whoever could come, I'll pick you up, so that's a different fight, right? That's a different work. Then you get the kids, I just love reading and writing. Like, that's a whole different work, right? And so I appreciate all of those. Thank you in honoring your grandmother. Can you say her full name for us so that we make sure we honor her in this space?
Manuela de la Cruz Garcia.
And so we're going to honor her in this space and her activist spirit. Thank you so much. I love that Andrea's grandmother was the love of her life, and that she planted within her seeds of a love for the people and of justice fighting. I am holding on to what makes a hunger striker. According to Andrea, a hunger striker is someone who gets angry enough to use that to fight for something bigger than themselves. But it is also someone who loves so hard that they don't want anyone else to suffer in that way. And even though the struggle continues, Patty reminds us that there is beauty in struggle. Thank you for listening to part 3 of our And the Struggle Continues series. I'm sad that this series is ending. It was so wonderful. The books mentioned in this episode will be linked in the show notes. If something from this episode resonates with you, please share it with others and let us know through our website, evolvingeducationproject.com. And be sure to tune in next Wednesday for a new episode. Trust, you do not want to miss it. To find out more about the Evolving Education Project, to write in, or to join our listserv, check us out at evolvingeducationproject.com. And please subscribe to this podcast and follow us on Instagram, X, and Facebook. If you can only choose one, please follow us on Instagram and love all of our posts. Support that doesn't cost a dime. If you've been enjoying our podcast, you can also support us by writing a review. Favorable reviews help more educators, organizers, families, communities, and activists find us. We hope to continue to cultivate an authentic audience and community. We want you to help us to evolve over time and shape what this could be. Now that you know what we're about, let us know what you want to learn more about, authors that you would like us to interview, discussions you would like to have. Okay, that's all for now, good people. Tune in next week for a new episode. We out.